Thank you for joining today's webinar, and at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Bill.
Great, thanks, Michelle, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the HBK Risk Advisory webinar series. My name is Bill Heaven, and I'm a Senior Director here at HBK. And I work both in our IT department and our risk advisory practice. And again, thanks for joining today. Today I've got what I believe is a very important topic, one that I covered over 2 years ago, and I thought it was time to do a refresh on it. So we're going to talk about third-party risk management, and I hope everybody finds it interesting. So here's our agenda, what I'm going to go through, kind of hit the background, go over some risks, some suggestions of, so what I'm trying to do is give you some background, and if you don't have a risk management program currently, to get you started, and then if you do, talk about some of the gaps that you may be experiencing over the past couple of years and what characteristics of a mature cybersecurity / third-party risk management system program would entail. So here are the learning objectives that we're going to go through today. And just to give you a little bit of housekeeping as far as logistics. So today's webinar is available for 1 hour of CPE credit. So those of you that want to get credit, there's 4 embedded CPE questions. Hopefully you don't find them too difficult, because I try to make them pretty easy. The 4th of which is just a yes or no question to I want to receive CPE or not. So if you want to get the hour of CPE credit, just pay attention and then answer the 4 questions. Not to be confused, I've got a couple polling questions in where I want to try to gain the perspective of the audience so that we can hopefully add a little bit more color and insights to try to help you get some more value out of today's webinar. But so these are our learning objectives, kind of like your takeaways on what you should be able to, what you're going to gain from being in today's webinar. And here's my bio, and again, I've been with HBK for, it'll be 6 years here coming up in a couple months. So like I said, I've got a dual role working in the IT department doing our overall IT security, and then also working with clients. And speaking of the polling questions that I was talking about, here's our first polling question. So I'm trying to figure out where the audience is as far as if their company is doing anything to manage third-party risks. So I've got a polling question, and if you just want to pop in A through D, whichever one makes the most sense for your organization, then we'll review the results and talk about it real briefly. So go ahead and answer that polling question for me. Okay, just a few more seconds here. We got the majority of the today's audience participating. So it looks like we've got about almost everyone. So I'm gonna let's go see what everything says. All right, so basically, not totally unexpected to what I was thinking was gonna be up there. Most everybody is either not doing anything or going to be doing something within the next year. I think that's probably pretty standard. I know it's, from my perspective, what I'm doing here internally. It's not out of the realm. We've been doing third-party risk management for over 2 years now, and I'd say that one of the things I've got to get changed or modified is that just like this polling question is saying, where we don't have anybody evaluating all the new vendors. Well, actually, we are doing that, new vendors and existing. One of the areas for improvement that I'm looking at is doing more with existing vendors as they expire on contracts, and that. So I'm glad to see we're doing about almost 15% of the audience is doing that right now. So just a few stats that I came across when I was preparing this webinar is that we've got about 69%, according to a Forrester research survey, we've got almost 70% of respondents saying that they're just doing a manual risk management program, I should say, and actually there's only 30% of companies that are doing at least half of their third-party relationships. So again, we're not that far off. If 50% in the Forrester study compared to our 70-some percent, we're kind of in the ballpark there. And then additionally, there's a statistic that I found out there that 77% of executives say that they need to overhaul their risk management program. So we'll talk about that a little bit later in the program when I talk about some of the gaps and characteristics of a mature program. But again, one of the reasons why I thought it was important to refresh this topic and cover it here today as part of the Risk Advisory Services webinar is that statistically and through surveys, and I found this in multiple places, and it's maybe off a percentage point or two here or there, but it's low 50% of I've seen 50, 52, 53, 54%, all where third-party breaches are the result of actually I should say overall breaches are caused by a third party. So back in about 10 years ago now, Target still gets a lot of bad press about their third-party breach with their HVAC, but still, no matter where I look and try to get up-to-date statistics, companies are still saying that they're being breached and the breaches are a result of a third party north of 50% of the time. So that's a pretty good reason why we should be concerned about third-party risk and why we should take it seriously. And again, that's why I'm doing this webinar today. So hopefully you all get some takeaways from it that's valuable at your own companies. So let's start on going through the agenda and our background. So here, third-party risk continues to rise, like I've said. Areas where we're seeing, where I want to talk about is that we're seeing more in email / phishing, supply chain threats, and those continue to evolve. I mean, I think it was 2021 where you had everything was unknown about the SolarWinds, where the quote unquote supply chain risk came into play. And if you don't remember SolarWinds or don't know a lot about it, what that was is hackers got into the SolarWinds system, and SolarWinds was doing like maintenance for other companies, so they would do patching and stuff. So the hackers got into SolarWinds and changed some of the certs and everything, and it made it look like SolarWinds was sending out updates to their clients that needed to be done. So the clients just automatically clicked the box and said, yeah, it's coming from SolarWinds, so we can trust it. And then that spread malware all throughout their environment. It's getting still happening. There was most recently you heard about stuff with the Move It file exchange transfer tool which would be a supply chain risk, as well as the Okta, the identity management, where they had the same type of situation where people thought it was legit coming from them, but it was actually they had been breached. So this third party thing it's going to get, I think it's going to get even trickier, especially with some of the advances in phishes. I know that I'm hearing a lot more and people are questioning me a lot more internally. Hey, is this a phishing email or is this real? Because the bad guys are getting to be a little bit better at their craft, and it's looking more realistic. And then again, the third party breaches continue north of 50%, like I was saying previously. So for those of you looking for CPE, here's the first question on the CPE that we'll need you to answer, and just who would not be considered a third party? Hopefully that we have a couple of minutes there. Michelle, if you can let me know when it looks like people are answered that question, we'll give. Not everybody's going to want CPE, but I can't see the results as far as how many people have answered. So if you just yell, or I'll just give it a minute here. So. Third party is like, how are your third party or otherwise known in a lot of cases as vendors? How do they stack up? How do they rank against each other? So you've got contracts where people are supposed to be meeting certain criteria, SLAs. You've got that to look at, and then you also have to worry about you're working with a vendor, and depending on what you've done, or if it's an outsource, or if you're relying on something for them to help you with a system-related thing. How are they exposing you to? You've got all these state security, data security, and privacy laws popping up everywhere. So are they exposing you to that? So you need to be concerned about that as far as how your vendors are related. Specifically talking about the ways that they're attacking our systems, like I was saying, that we've got hijacking of websites, another thing that phishes are used for, and I talked about phishes getting to be a little bit more sophisticated. Ransomware, you always hear about ransomware continuing to increase. I'm looking forward to, as a precursor to a webinar, I think it's slated for June, because the Verizon data breach investigations report comes out typically in actually May. It's typically moving later in May, so I typically try to do a webinar in like June, and then we'll find out what's going on with ransomware. Ransomware is still hitting from previous statistics, is hitting about 25% of our breaches or incidents were classified as ransomware, so that continues to go up. We talked about that in recent webinars. But again, the undermining, the code signing, that's what I was talking about with the supply chain breaches, and that's exactly what they did with the SolarWinds, where they made it look like, by manipulating the certificates and things, make it look like it was legit communication coming from a trusted source, when really it wasn't a trusted, it wasn't who they thought it was. So you have to be careful with that. 0-day risks are, you probably heard of that term because it gets used all over the place, but a 0 day is basically a vulnerability that the bad guys uncover before the vendor knows that it's a risk or anybody else knows it's a risk. So it's before a vendor can patch something, they have to know it. So these 0 days are, more and more of an issue where really the only way to fight that is to have good. If you've heard any of my recent webinars where I talk about cybersecurity hygiene, that's your best defense against the 0 day. But some of the new things that we're looking at along the lines of I consider it a supply chain risk will be compromising open source code. So I think we have some protection there, but it's still something to keep in mind. The protection on open source would be that you've got a lot of people out there contributing to that open source. So they would probably also contribute to fighting the vulnerabilities, but it's something that you have to be concerned about if you are relying on open source in your environment. This is a next thing, and I'll go through these. You'll see these slides. It'll look like I'm repeating them, but I'm actually talking about different parts, so like giving you background and giving you different risks in the area, and then going through and talking about how we can protect it or as part of a mature environment. So who owns a vendor risk? This is kind of like that old age chicken or the egg, what came first. It's like who owns it, the business or IT? It's kind of, if you've ever had the debate internally, like who owns cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is really a business level risk that kind of gets pushed on IT or information security. Same type of thing with vendor risk. There's a little bit of a tug of war between is it procurement or is it information security? Information security definitely has a role because typically they're the people that know more about your data privacy and protection and overall information security. So I think they need to be involved, but they shouldn't own it. Just like cybersecurity being a business exposure, you need to think of vendor risk as kind of the same thing. It's more of the overall business, not simply procurement. And here at HBK with the third-party risk management program that I put into place, so IT security plays a big role in that, but we just try to present the facts, and then it's up to the person that owns that part of the business to whether they're willing to accept that risk. In other words, I'm putting all the risk and facts out there, and then they make the decision. It's not up to me to say, you should use this vendor or you shouldn't use this vendor. It's like, here's the risks, weigh the consequences and make a decision to whether you want to work with them or not. I can kind of, if they ask my opinion, I can say, well, this one seems like it might be a little too risky, but I try to keep it as if it's where the responsibility belongs with the business, not at IT. So ownership is a big thing to keep in mind. And I just wanted to go over some of the, this is if you haven't put in a third-party risk management, or if you're just new at it, and then I'll talk later in the presentation about some of the things that you can do where identifying gaps and what the current or characteristics of a mature program would be. So you've got 5 stages here of discover, analyze, manage and quantify, prioritize and treat, and then continuous monitoring. So the big areas here, I'll just talk about these real simply. In the discover phase or step, you want to basically understand what your data is and classify your data so that you can figure out what vendors or third parties are going to be working with what data and how sensitive that is, and that gives you a way to categorize your your vendors. I'll talk a little bit about the gaps where people can't really figure out how to categorize their vendors, so it's just a big stew pot of vendors or third parties, and you can't really segment things and work with the highest priority. And you have to analyze the vendor, how they're going to work into your environment. I call this triage. And what I've done here is we have put together a series of high-level questions to figure out, just how we're going to work with this vendor and what kind of data they're going to have access to. And it's obviously I rank them as a higher risk if they're going to take possession of our data or if they're going to have access to our computer system, because then we want to be very, very picky at who we let in and give access to our data. So that's part of the analysis phase where you have to figure out, again, triage, analysis, whatever you want to term it, but you want to figure out what the possible negative impact could be. So it's a very important step, and it allows you to make a decision about it. And then you, based on that analysis and the triage, then you can quantify the risk and or prioritize it to figure out who is going to be your top risky versus your least risky vendors, and then the amount of time you spend on them, would be prioritized as well. So if it's not a very big risk, then don't spend a lot of time on it. If it is a big risk, then be pretty picky. So it's like, after you have all that slotted out, then you can prioritize who you want to work with and then figure out how to treat it. And then the biggest thing, and that's where some of these security ratings is, I'll talk about some automation steps later on, but continuous monitoring is an important thing. It's kind of like, you have a very risky vendor and you spend some time with them in that, but then, or you think that a vendor isn't very risky, and then they change, and it's the ones you want to be really concerned about are the ones that you consider very risky, and they were in a good position, but now all of a sudden they're not. So that's an exposure to your company, because if you have somebody that maybe has access to your data or your systems, you thought they were good, and then all of a sudden they're bad, and you don't know it unless you're able to continuously monitor them in some way. And I'll talk later about one of the tools we use here, but I can set up alerts and figure out if a company's security posture has made any changes, and then I can get updated on that. So that continuous monitoring is a very important step. Here's our second polling question, not CP. I'm just trying to get some background on where the audience is. Are you aware? Have you been impacted by a third-party risk or not? Just a yes or no. So again, I'll give you a little bit of time to answer that question, and we can discuss some of the poll results. A little bit longer here. We got most of the audience responding. So 10 or 20 more seconds here, and then we'll move on. Try to pick up a little bit of speed here, so we can cover the material here. All right, we're about where we were for the first polling question. So let's see what the results are. So good news is that almost 90% of us have not been impacted by third-party risk. So that's good. That's like I said, you're in statistics, just overall are that approximately, low 50% of people are. So it's good that we're not, but keep in mind that third-party risk is bigger and bigger thing for a couple of reasons. Number one is that we're trying to become more efficient as an organization, and that means that we kind of hand off some of our tasks to a third party to handle something more efficiently. So that could expose us to third party risk as we're trying to cut costs or improve efficiency. So keep that in mind, that third party risk overall is still increasing. It's gone up. It's gone up from when I did this similar presentation a couple of years back. And just keep that in mind, that as we work more with third parties, by default, the more third parties you're working with, the more exposure you would have overall. And let's talk about, this is our second polling question for CPE, not polling. We just did the polling first, now we're CPE. So if you want CPE for today's webinar, do this question. We'll just give you a few more seconds here. Michelle, when you see we're about where we were for the first CPE question, just hit the next button on the slide for me, and we can move on. I don't want to spend too much time here, but all right. So let's talk about our next agenda topic, which is the risks. What risks are we exposing ourselves to? And again, the supply chain threats I talked about with SolarWinds and Okta and MoveIt, that's relatively, those types of attacks are only about 2 years old. So those continue to be where we're at risk. And the bigger thing is this email, and I'm sure everybody else is seeing the same thing that I'm seeing, is that, I never used to get text message, SMS, or smishing type hacks or attempted hacks. They're doing that more and more frequently now. So again, just keep in mind that that's where we're seeing. And overall breach costs are rising. The third-party breach are, from the best I can determine, about 25% increase, which is in line with the overall breach, which are now getting closer to $5 million for a breach. Now, obviously, when you factor in these huge organizations that get hit with 100 million, that's going to make the number go up. But still, it's a big number. Where I think this latest statistics, it's almost 60% of businesses that are hit with a cybersecurity breach end up going out of business within a year. So it's definitely, there is a reason why we need to be concerned with third-party breaches. Again, just talking about the rating. So this would give you the opportunity to, as you start to work with a new vendor or you renew, consider putting SLAs or service level agreements in place. And then, like I talked before, you could be exposed based on doing outsourcing or trying to get more efficient, reduce costs. Security and privacy, there's always the possibility of state laws, and it's typically how the state is going to work is if you do business or you have customers in a particular state, then you have to follow their security and privacy rules. A good place to make note of is it's called IAPP.org, or International Association of Privacy Professionals. And they have actually state privacy tracker things where you can just log into their website every month or every couple months and look and see who's new on the horizon. Still, the one that gets a lot of notoriety, other than GDPR, the European Privacy Act, is that's on an international basis, and only if you have customers in Europe, but in the U.S. here, the CCPA or the California Consumer Privacy Act is still the one that gets a lot of headlines. The attack vectors, similar to, I think I beat this one to death. So, but the things to keep in mind are the next generation supply chain or the code signing. That's going to be more and more. I mean, talked about Okta and MoveIt. I think there was the Log4j, which was a couple of years back, where that was the Apache, where that was the Apache's web servers usually where people had websites, and when the use of Java code was a big thing there. But just keep in mind that hacking overall, social engineering, people trying to get into your place of business, pretending you're a copy repairman or exterminator. Quid pro quo is big, that, hey, I'm your IT department and they're trying to help you out. So if you give me your logon credentials, I can help you from having this, being a victim of this error and that. And then just by trying to trick you into that, they're making you a victim. I talked before about where to own the risk, where it should be placed. If you don't have anybody owning it, you're basically, I mean, there's no use even having it. So it would be better to have it owned somewhere where it's not maybe the best solution. Again, I talked about IT security shouldn't be the sole owner, but if the only way you can get something started is for IT security to own it, you can do that, and then you can start to educate people how that they really should take some responsibility at the business owner level. So that's always an option as you get these programs off the ground. Again, similar to if you can't figure out where to own it, if you don't have the right steps in place, then obviously if you don't have any steps in place, then you don't have any programs. So something's better than nothing. And I'm going to talk here in a couple minutes about some of the gaps that have been identified and what the mature organizations have, which again, that'll give you, our audience today is probably the majority of us either don't do anything now or are thinking of putting something in place in the next year. So this kind of gives you a little background about putting a program in place, and then add some content at the end that talks about mature organizations. So we can talk about that. That's what we'll move into next, is the some of the suggestions. Let me catch up here in the notes. Probably the biggest thing is, because it's Verizon, establish some type of program where you can establish a governance to put some of the things in place, and that you can do security awareness training to make people aware of the risks, which is going to help your overall cybersecurity hygiene, which the better you are with cybersecurity in general, the better you're going to be with evaluating third-party risk, and et cetera. And then I talked about IAPP.org to monitor the privacy and things. So those are some things to keep in mind and for suggestions. And then, like I said, as you renew contracts, then you can, maybe put in SLAs or try to get things. You can tell, dear Mr. Vendor, I'm not going to renew my services with you because your service wasn't that good the last time. So if you want to say that you're going to give me X% uptime or responsiveness, then maybe I'll renew. So you can do that as part of a new program. And then the attack vendors. Again, you can sign up with the FBI. The FBI does what's called a flash report, which will tell you some of the big hacking things that are coming up, as well as you hear a lot. I hear a lot of advertisements on the radio now about the CISA or CISA. It's the part of Homeland Security. It's www.cisa.gov, and they'll give you a lot of tips as far as suggestions for doing security awareness, and it just helps you stay up to date on some of the attack vectors that people are trying to use now. So this is actually CPU question number 3. So it's go ahead and answer whether. Hopefully this is very simple and we can move on in just a couple seconds here. But it's third-party risk rising, true or false? Yeah, all right, good. Thanks, Michelle. So again, you need to get upper management input on your vendor risk. Like a lot of things in our companies, if you try to put something in place and the highest level of management don't adhere to it or don't pay attention to it, everybody down the line is going to see that. So if you want the higher chances, probabilities of success, get your top layer of management bought on before you even try to put anything into place, because that's not going to you're not going to have the best chances of success if your people observe your top managers not playing ball, so to speak. So, and then talking about third-party risk management steps. Again, we talked about this in the past. I went through the detail of the 5 stages and what was made up of it. So I'm just going to try to keep things moving here and talk about some of the. I thought this was interesting when I was doing some research on this to figure out what the gaps were and what people were, how they were evolving. Because like I said, I've been doing this internally at HBK for a little over 2 years, and I'm just trying to figure out how to make it better. So that was some pretty interesting and worthwhile research and trying to figure out what your characteristics are. So and then I'm gonna, if you're one of those, I think we have 25% of our audience doing some third party. So if you're already doing it, or if you're not doing it, why? You can kind of like morph this whole question as to why you aren't doing it, maybe because you thought, well, I don't have any people to do it, or I don't have our third parties will be too difficult to assess. If you're not doing it, maybe you can morph this question a little bit to figure out why you're not doing it. Just a couple minutes here, a minute or so, and we'll move on to get through the rest of the presentation before we run out of time. Just another few seconds here. I haven't already answered. All right, let's see what people are thinking here. So yeah, that's a pretty big one. That's kind of my internal issue. Me, myself, and I sometimes wonder how we're going to get some stuff done. So lack of personnel, I would fully expect that to be the biggest reason as to why people aren't doing a third party. Again, if you can't, we should have a 0, but if you can't prioritize or do, I think that triage method is a good way to try to figure out what vendors, third parties you need to spend the most time with. parties are too difficult to assess. I think that's somewhat true, but I think if you just start to put some stuff down and start to work through it, you'll find out that maybe you're not as they're not as difficult as you might think. It's just once you get into it, it sometimes seems to be a little bit more doable. Let's talk about some of the gaps. Well, the biggest gaps are that we're not inadequate coverage, or we got too many, too big of a backlog. Those are the backlog would definitely go along with the lack of resources that we just answered on our previous polling question. Not tiering or prioritizing means you kind of lends to the backlog because you don't know where to start, so you don't know when you finish. And maybe you're going to do a thing where you're only going to assess your high risk vendors as opposed to, so maybe you've got 100 vendors, I'm just pulling a number out, but only 10% of them are high risk. So if you only have to assess 10 vendors versus 100, then it's you're making progress, and all of a sudden your backlog isn't as big as what you thought it was. So those are some of the gaps that you have to keep in mind. And then what are some of the mature characteristics that companies are using? It's really along the lines of these three. People are using automation, they're using assessment exchanges, and I don't know how many of you were on our webinar from last month. I talked about artificial intelligence. So again, artificial intelligence is pretty much everywhere you look. Somebody's doing something with artificial intelligence. And the automation, it really goes into like 3 subcategories there. It's your onboarding of your third party, ongoing monitoring or continuous monitoring, and then doing performance management. So it's automation could be something as standard as just like I've talked before, doing a triage to try to put maybe you do some type of survey monkey thing where you can put a quick questionnaire out there that you send to everybody, and it's just like 4 or 5 questions to try to figure out, that could be automation. Or you could have a template security questionnaire that maybe you put a couple different versions together, that if it's for a high, medium, or low risk vendor, and that could be considered your automation. Use of assessment exchanges. This is getting to be bigger and bigger. There's if anybody's heard of the SIG Lite, there's some exchanges out there where you can actually, I don't know how well this is going to work, but they keep getting bigger, so people must be finding success in this. In other words, if you do business with vendor ABC, and you find out that on one of these group exchanges that somebody else is working with vendor ABC, and if they posted out there what their results were, then you could technically get some level of comfort there. You got to be a little bit concerned or cautious, I should say, to make sure, is anybody auditing these results? Because if company ABC just goes out there and lies out their tail and puts a bunch of stuff that isn't true, and people are thinking that they're more secure than they really are, then you've got some issues. But that's one of the things that you can consider as your program matures. And artificial intelligence there's going to be more and more stuff, like I had talked last. I haven't tried this to go out and see how well ChatGPT would evaluate. When I first started my risk management of third parties, I would make sure they had a SOC report from the AICPA to have to go through and tear apart their stock report, and that took a very long time. And then I graduated to working with security rating services, like a hit site or security scorecard. You could do that. It's not going to be too long till you can tell Chat GPT to go out and take a look at XYZ company's SOC 2 report and give me a summary of it. And then you could use that to start to figure out how well somebody's third-party risk management program is. So that's going to be on the horizon. Again, you want to be careful with what information you give to artificial intelligence site, because what are they going to do with that data? But that's definitely something that's coming. So we've got a little bit of time left. I think we're on our last CPE question. So if you want CPE for today, here's your last question. This is hopefully the hardest one of the four that you'll have to answer. Because if that's true, then our previous three were not that difficult. So just take a few seconds here and answer that question, and then we'll move on to our wrap up, and we'll see if we have any questions here to finish off today's webinar. So I think everyone that wanted CP should have had time to answer that now. All right, so let's move on to the wrap up. So hopefully you found today's presentation that third-party risk is a big deal. Our audience is not really seeing that locally, but hopefully this gave you some additional things to think about why, if you haven't done a third-party program yet, that maybe you should at least put something in place. If you do have any questions, we have a few questions popping up here on the Q&A, and we'll address those because we have about a few minutes left here. We're not quite out of time yet, but if you have any questions after the fact, here's my contact information. You can always feel free to reach out. And Michelle, do you have any question? It looks like we have time for a couple questions here. Do you have any that are showing up on the Q&A board here?
Yes, the first one is, excuse me, what makes the most sense as far as securing our IT environment?
I would say just don't get too elaborate. Just stay pretty much keep the basics. I mean, if you can just put in a security awareness program or things where you get people to understand, what they're being faced with out there. And you can do this yourself. You can work with someone like HBK to help you do this. But like I mentioned earlier, the Verizon report is going to be coming out in May. That's just a little over a month from now. You can read that and you can see where the hackers are focusing, and you can put together a high-level presentation for your company, and you can go through and do some security awareness. But it'll just make people more aware, and if they're aware, then hopefully they're going to soon be more cognizant of that. So I would stick with the obvious and don't try to get too down into the weeds. But that's typically a good place to start. That security awareness leads to phishing and the pretexting where people are going to try to get into your building and fake being a copy or repairman or exterminator or whatever. So just keep it pretty basic would be my suggestion there. Any others, Michelle?
Yes, the next question that was submitted was, what do you see as the biggest challenge regarding third-party risk moving forward?
I would say that along the lines of what our polling question did is what people were thinking is just like everything else, because we're everybody's, stretched for resources, so that we're trying to do more with less. That's not any unique thing to IT security or security awareness. So the lack of resources would probably be one of the biggest challenges. And then, as I said, we talked about supply chain attacks on the cyber front, where SolarWinds came out of the blue about 3.5, 4 years ago. And now, we've got a bunch of other supply chain type risks with the Move It, and it's just the Okta. So yeah, I think we're up to 3 or 4 well-known supply chain hacks. So that's getting to be more and more exposure, and just I think it's the challenge is going to be how much can we trust artificial intelligence, and can we use artificial intelligence to safely take some of our workload away, because our biggest challenge being lack of resources. So in that area, as resources, artificial intelligence, how they're going to work together is and save us some time. Hopefully that's the case, and we can all put in third-party risk management programs and make ourselves safer. So, but again, resources is going to be a challenge. Any other questions out there right now, Michelle?
Yes, we have one more. What takeaway from today's webinar topic do you find most interesting?
Probably just the same type of thing that just makes me scratch my head about phishing emails, is just that companies are super nice / they believe what they see in front of them, and they're probably more trusting than they need to be. Just because a phishing email comes in and it says like, hey, this is who we are, give us your login and your password. Similar type of thing is, I'm working with XYZ company, and they're a big company, so they must be safe. So it's the same thing. So that's one of the things that kind of just makes me scratch my head, and probably one of the most interesting points of why third-party risk management needs to be considered, is that we're just too trusting. So it's just one of those things. Human nature, everybody wants to help everybody. So we want to help everybody, and we want to believe everything that everybody tells us. So unfortunately, you probably need to be a little more pessimistic than that. But that would be my most interesting takeaway fact. Anything else out there? See, we got a few minutes left, but I think we're running ahead of schedule here a little bit. But so I'll give everybody a few minutes back. But again, on the previous slide, if you have any questions that come up, feel free to reach out to me. Additionally, thanks again for attending today's webinar. I hope you found it worthwhile. And as a save the date, we're going to be doing our next webinar at the end of April, 4th Wednesday, same time, which will be the 24th from 10 to 11. Got a guest speaker lined up, which should be pretty interesting. We've got a gentleman from the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company that's in charge of their business continuity disaster recovery planning. So he's going to talk a little bit about what Goodyear does there, and then we're going to try to translate it down to how we can help protect ourselves from the business continuity on a smaller scale. So that should be very interesting. So look for the invite for that for the 24th of April. And again, thanks for attending, and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.